In this video, we will discuss the aqueous humor, and in particular, we'll talk a bit about what it is, where it's located, and most importantly, how it flows within the eye. And understanding the aqueous humor pathway will provide you an important foundation for understanding some of the glaucoma therapies, both medical and surgical, that we'll discuss in our glaucoma videos. And so to provide you with a framework for better understanding glaucoma, we will review the most salient points about the anterior and posterior chamber, the ciliary bodies, the trabecular meshwork, and uveoscleral outflow pathway in this video. First of all, what is the aqueous humor? So the aqueous humor is a transparent watery fluid within the eye, and specifically it's found in the front of the eye in the anterior chamber and posterior chamber, which we'll define in the next slide. Note that these are distinct from the vitreous humor, which is found in the back of the eye, and this is a transparent gelatinous tissue behind the lens. Now, as you might expect, the aqueous humor plays an important role in maintaining the overall intraocular pressure of the eye and keeping the globe of the eye inflated. But it also plays an important role in providing nutrients in the form of amino acids and glucose to tissues in the eye that are avascular. And examples of these include the posterior cornea and the lens. So in the previous slide, I mentioned that the aqueous humor can be found in the posterior and anterior chambers. So let's just remind ourselves where these are in the eye. So here on the right is a diagram of the eye, and we have this vitreous humor here in the back of the eye, and there are three important structures that I'd like to review that will serve as landmarks for the purposes of this discussion. And so that is the lens, which plays an important role in focusing light, the iris, which plays an important role in controlling pupillary size, and of course the cornea, which plays an important protective role in the eye. The space between the lens and the iris is known as the posterior chamber. And this is where aqueous humor is formed by the ciliary bodies, specifically the ciliary epithelium, which is continuous with the choroid, which is shown here in red. The other component of the ciliary body is the ciliary muscle, which controls the shape of the lens via zonual fibers. The aqueous humor then travels through the pupil from the posterior chamber into the anterior chamber, which is the space between the iris and the cornea, and this is where the aqueous humor is drained. And it can be drained by one of two pathways, either via the trabecular meshwork or the uveoscleral pathway. So let's take a closer look at the flow of aqueous humor from production to drainage in this magnified diagram. So here is the ciliary body in the posterior chamber, and it consists of the ciliary muscle and the ciliary epithelium. The ciliary epithelium secretes aqueous humor into the posterior chamber, and this fluid can then flow through the pupil into the anterior chamber of the eye. Once the aqueous humor is in the anterior chamber, it can be drained via one of two pathways, as I mentioned in the previous slide, either the trabecular meshwork or the uveoscleral pathway, which is shown here in purple. So the trabecular meshwork is basically this spongy tissue located at the base of the cornea near the ciliary bodies. And this allows for the aqueous humor to drain into a structure known as the canal of Schlemm. And from here, the fluid then drains to the episcleral blood vessels and is absorbed back into the blood circulation. And the trabecular meshwork is how about 85% of the aqueous humor is drained, and that's why it's also sometimes known as the conventional pathway. The other pathway by which aqueous humor can drain is via the uveoscleral pathway, shown here in purple. And this is a pathway whereby aqueous humor drains into the ciliary bodies and then into the supraciliary and the suprachoroidal spaces. This fluid can then drain across the sclera to be reabsorbed into the circulation. And note that unlike the trabecular meshwork drainage pathway, the uveoscleral outflow route is not a distinctive pathway with tubes and channels, but really rather a route whereby aqueous humor seeps through, around, and between tissues.